So, picture the floor of the Heidebank Arena down in Kolding, Denmark.
Oh, right, for the big annual whiskey fair.
Exactly. You've got bagpipes echoing off the rafters, attendees are swirling their little Glencairn glasses, and the air is just thick with that heavy, peated expectation of traditional whiskey.
Yeah, you're expecting to see, centuries-old Scottish estates or maybe some big Kentucky barrel houses.
Right. You definitely do not expect a tiny, wind-battered North Atlantic archipelago with a population of like 55,000 people to just crash the party.
No, not at all. It completely throws you off.
But that's exactly what we're digging into today. Our sources for this deep dive feature some really incredible on-the-ground interviews and exclusive tasting notes from that exact arena floor.
And we're talking about unfinished, unreleased spirits here, right?
Yeah, from two very specific Faroese distilleries, Einar'sand Fair Isles. And the overarching mission for you, the listener, today is exploring this one singular theme. We are looking at the architecture of expectations.
I love that framing.
Yeah, we're dissecting how you engineer a flavor profile completely from scratch, how you price a legacy, and what actually happens when the meticulous math of modern distilling basically collides with an environment that locals describe as famously bad for people.
Yeah, that tension between like strict human planning and totally wild terroir, it completely upends how we evaluate these spirits.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really grasp the immense weight of the expectations placed on Faroese whiskey right now, we have to look at how these two operations actually started.
Right, because they offer radically opposed philosophies on how to enter what is, frankly, a really saturated global market.
Totally. So the story of Einar's distillery is essentially this massive generational waiting game. Our sources introduce us to Annika, who is the fourth generation of the Einar family.
Wow, fourth generation.
Yeah, and they've been distilling whiskey for almost 10 years now, which, and this is wild, coincides precisely with the moment the Faroese government finally overturned their Prohibition-era alcohol laws.
Laws that dated all the way back to 1888, by the way.
Exactly. Annika points out that her grandfather dreamed of starting a distillery. Like, if the government had just allowed it back then, they'd be sitting on 130-year-old stock today.
Which is just crazy to think about.
But instead, they had to sit on that ambition for over a century.
And I mean, carrying that kind of historical baggage, that creates a paralyzing amount of pressure.
Oh, absolutely.
When you are finally granted the legal right to execute a century-old family dream, your margin for error is basically zero. You cannot afford to release a mediocre first batch.
No, you really can't. And Einar's process reflects that immense caution. They've run about 20 batches over the last decade, but rather than, just rushing to market, they actually sought validation from some pretty established titans in the industry.
Right, they brought in Jim Murray from the Whiskey Bible to evaluate their spirit.
Yeah, and they consulted really heavily with the Danish distilling legend Niels Romer.
Which makes sense. They are essentially outsourcing their quality assurance to ensure that the global expectation of their product is rock solid before they pour a single commercial glass.
Exactly. They took the traditional path of proving they belong in the club, but then you have Faer Isles, located literally just down the hall at the same whiskey fair, taking the exact opposite approach.
Oh, completely.
Before they even turned on the stills, they hired a Scottish whiskey consultant, Gordon Steele, to write a literal manifesto.
A manifesto for whiskey.
Yeah. They sat down in a boardroom, mapped out the exact flavor profile they intended to produce, and legally mandated, that the whiskey must feature distinct notes of grass to evoke the Faroes landscape.
It feels incredibly presumptuous, doesn't it, to try and design terroir on a whiteboard.
Right. It's the equivalent of writing a 5-star review for a movie before you've cast the actors or even shot a single frame of footage.
Okay.
You are literally mandating an environmental outcome.
What's fascinating here is that it's a profound shift from the romanticized mystery of the barrel to this really strict, data-driven production model.
Yeah, it's so calculated.
Faer Isles is attempting to bypass the traditional trial and error phase that plagues almost all new distilleries. Usually, you distill, you barrel it, you wait 3 years, you just sort of pray and see what the wood gave you.
Right. It's a waiting game.
But Faer Isles built their entire operation backward from a predetermined sensory target. And they are ruthless about defending that engineered expectation.
They really are. In the interviews, Daniel Højdal from Faer Isles admitted that they actually have older spirits sitting in their warehouse right now, stuff distilled in early 2023.
Wait, Really?
Yeah. But they were refusing to use it for their debut release simply because the liquid didn't strictly align with the flavor profile outlined in Gordon Steele's manifesto.
That level of discipline is staggering. But, the limit of that whiteboard planning becomes immediately obvious when you physically place the barrel out on the islands.
Because the climate just takes over.
Exactly. The Faroes climate completely shatters traditional models of maturation.
Faer Isles actually embraces this bizarre environment, though. They have this brilliant quote where they note that the weather is, quote, bad for people, but good for whiskey.
Which is hilarious.
It is. The climate there is famously static. The summers are boring. The winters are boring. It just hovers in this really narrow band between 6 and 9 degrees Celsius all year round.
And that static temperature completely changes the physics of aging.
How so?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, in traditional whiskey regions like Kentucky, for example, maturation relies on extreme thermal expansion.
Right, the hot summers.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Boiling summers force the liquid deep into the oak staves, which extracts all those lignins, tannins, and sugars. And then freezing winters cause the wood to contract, squeezing the liquid back out.
So the whiskey physically breathes the wood.
Yes. But in the Faroe Islands, that thermal pump just doesn't exist. The temperature never gets hot enough to drive the liquid deep into the barrel through expansion.
Which naturally leads to this wild anomaly with the Angel's share.
Oh, the evaporation rates.
Yeah. So in Scotland, the evaporation rate, the Angel's share, is typically 1.5% to 2% volume loss every single year. Up in the Orkney Islands, it drops to maybe 0.5%.
It's already very low.
Right. But the raw data from the Faer Isles casks reveals an evaporation rate that is almost zero.
That is insane.
A cask starting at 63.53% ABV sat for nearly 3 years, 937 days to be exact, and it only dropped to 60.54%.
Wow. The lack of evaporation is a direct result of that static, cold environment, right? I mean, ethanol just doesn't vaporize quickly at 6 degrees Celsius.
Exactly.
But the absence of that thermal expansion raises a really critical mechanical question.
Mm-hmm.
If the liquid isn't expanding into the wood due to heat, how is the whiskey actually maturing?
Right, because it shouldn't be working.
It shouldn't. But the answer lies in the physical setup of their maturation facilities. They don't use climate-controlled sealed warehouses.
No, they use old meat drying sheds.
Exactly. The barrels are stacked on these windswept peaks inside traditional Faroes meat drying sheds, which are built with intentional gaps in the wooden walls.
So the gale-force North Atlantic wind just whips right through the buildings, battering the porous oak constantly.
Yeah, that wind provides the mechanical force. Instead of temperature fluctuations pumping the liquid in and out, you have these constant barometric shifts.
Oh, that makes sense.
The relentless physical pressure of the wind forces microinteractions within just the first few millimeters of the oak stave. It creates this osmotic pressure that basically accelerates flavor extraction without losing any alcohol volume into the atmosphere.
So you get a spirit that retains its raw, high-proof strength while rapidly taking on the complexity of the wood.
Exactly.
So imagine you're an investor or a collector trying to evaluate a distillery portfolio. This completely breaks your standard mental models.
Oh, totally.
The scientific data says a cask losing almost no alcohol shouldn't be aging efficiently, yet the sensory data suggests it's maturing at this really aggressive pace.
And we actually have the sensory data to back that up.
We do. The source material grounds this theory with actual tasting notes of these unreleased Faer Isle samples. The first one we really need to examine is from cask 183.
The sub-C one, right?
Yeah. This is an unpeated spirit sitting in a first fill bourbon cask, and it utilizes subsea freshwater that they pump from beneath the ocean floor.
The data points on cask 183 map out an incredibly steep development curve. The first sample they pulled, at roughly 1 year old, sits at about 61% ABV.
Right.
And visually, the liquid is completely colorless. It mimics mineral water. The tasting notes describe the mouthfeel as extremely raw, using this really vivid analogy of basically sinking your teeth into a wet ship's oak plank.
Which doesn't sound super appetizing, honestly. But intertwined with that raw, aggressive oak is this distinct sweet note of pear.
Yeah, and that ester profile is classic. The yeast strains used during fermentation produce those bright, fruity notes. And because the cold temperature slows the extraction of those heavy wood tannins, those delicate esters actually get to shine through the raw spirit early on.
That makes total sense.
But then you analyze the second data point from that exact same cask, pulled at 718 days, so roughly 2 years.
And the ABV is virtually unchanged, right? It's at 60.75%.
Exactly. And visually, it is only shifted to a very pale, thin yellow. So your expectation, just based on looking at it, is a spirit that still tastes really raw and unfinished.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The flavor profile entirely betrays that visual expectation.
Oh, completely.
At just 2 years old, it presents these complex notes of pepper, dark spices, and the classic vanilla you'd normally associate with a first-fill bourbon cask.
And the development curve is even more extreme in the second sample they tested, which was cask 32.
The peated one.
Right. This is a gently peated spirit sitting at 17.5 ppm. At 1 year old, still hovering at 60.9% ABV, the smoke completely dominates the profile.
Though the reviewers did note it managed to remain pleasant rather than overly astringent or harsh.
True, but when you look at the 937-day mark for cask 32, so nearing 3 years, sitting at 60.54% ABV, the chemical transformation is just undeniable.
It really is.
The smoke recedes significantly. It integrates into the background and allows the cask's underlying character to finally emerge.
And the physical sensation of drinking this specific sample is probably the most fascinating detail in the tasting notes.
Oh, the mouthfeel thing.
Yeah. The nearly 3-year-old peated whiskey triggers this highly localized reaction. It hits a very specific spot on the underside of the tongue.
Which is so unusual.
It creates this unique viscous mouthfeel and an elongated finish that completely masks the high alcohol content. Reviewers flagged it as dangerously easy to drink for a 60.5% raw spirit.
Which is high praise.
Yeah.
Synthesizing all this sensory analysis, it's clear the Faroes microclimate is engineering a liquid that vastly outperforms its chronological age.
Definitely.
It achieves a textural smoothness and an integration at 3 years that typically requires, a decade in a traditional Scottish dunnage warehouse.
Right.
However, returning to Gordon Steele's founding manifesto for a second, the reviewer specifically noted the absence of those pre-planned grass notes.
Oh, that's right. The boardroom mandate.
Exactly. The board mandated a flavor profile to represent Faroe's terroir. But the actual terroir, the wind, the static temperature, the subsea water, it dictated a completely different sensory outcome.
Nature basically overrode the spreadsheet.
It really did.
Well, the whiskey in the barrel is clearly viable, which transitions us to probably the most complex expectation this operation has to manage right now, and that's market positioning.
On the business side.
Yeah, because making exceptional spirit in a windswept meat shed is a great artisanal triumph, but convincing the global market to actually pay a premium for it, that is a bureaucratic and economic war.
It really is.
Faer Isles is orchestrating their first official release for the autumn, which is about half a year away from when these interviews happened, and they are making a highly calculated decision to dilute their debut product down to roughly 48% ABV rather than releasing it at cask strength.
Which is a bold move. For a demographic of whiskey enthusiasts who totally obsess over cask strength purity, watering down an overperforming 60% spirit feels like a compromise to a lot of people.
Yeah, the nerds want the cask strength.
They do. But the underlying business mechanics absolutely necessitate it. This debut release is inherently a Veblen good.
A luxury collector's item where the demand is driven by how scarce it is.
Exactly. They only possess a very finite volume of this 3-year-old liquid. Bottling at full 60% strength would drain their most valuable, oldest inventory exponentially faster.
Oh, because they'd get fewer bottles per cask.
Precisely. By bringing the truth down to 48%, they mathematically stretch the allocation across multiple international markets without sacrificing the structural integrity of the flavor profile.
And the global ambition here is just staggering for a distillery that hasn't even officially launched its primary product yet. I mean, they aren't relying on the local market of 55,000 residents.
No, they can't survive on that alone.
Right. They have hard allocations carved out for exclusive markets in Denmark and Germany, and they are aggressively targeting the United States.
Specifically California, right?
Yeah, California, which is the 5th largest economy in the world, they are leveraging the high-level beverage and tech connections of their board chairman, Heine Zekarassen.
Oh, the founder of Vivino.
Exactly, the wine app guy.
Using a data-driven Silicon Valley playbook to launch a craft whiskey is a brilliant strategy for securing those distribution networks. But it doesn't shield you from federal bureaucracy.
No, it definitely doesn't.
The U.S. market is notoriously hostile to foreign spirits due to the 3-tier distribution system and the really strict regulatory frameworks of the TTB and the FDA.
Right. The paperwork is a nightmare.
The sources detail the immense friction Faer Isles has already encountered just trying to import their other spirits, like their gin and aquavit.
Oh, because of the ingredients.
Yes. The FTA requires all ingredients to have GRS status, generally recognized as safe.
And I'm guessing the wild Faroe seaweed and the hyperlocal botanicals they forage don't exactly exist on those standard federal registries.
They do not. They are trying to sell a hyperlocal expression of terroir. And the U.S. government is responding with regulatory roadblocks because their ingredient list doesn't match standard commercial templates.
That is so frustrating.
It is. And the administrative burden of proving the safety of regional botanicals drastically inflates the cost of entry, which brings us to the ultimate tension here: pricing the expectation of value.
Right. What will people actually pay for it?
Faer Isles hasn't finalized the price for their autumn release yet, and they are actively negotiating with international distributors to try and synchronize the cost across different European and American markets.
And Einar's offers a really stark cautionary tale regarding pricing in this exact scenario.
They caught some backlash, didn't they?
Severe backlash. Their whiskey faced intense criticism from reviewers for commanding astronomical retail prices. We're talking hitting a 1,000 Danish kroner for just a half-liter bottle.
Wow.
Yeah. And Faroe Isles has to navigate the exact same dilemma. How do you price a hyper-scarce first release high enough to signify its premium collector status, while keeping it accessible enough to actually build brand loyalty with the everyday enthusiast?
This raises an important question, really. It is the hardest needle to thread in the entire spirits industry.
I bet.
Price the debut too low, and you leave crucial capital on the table while simultaneously devaluing the unique narrative of the Faroes terroir. You make it seem cheap.
Right.
But price it at 1,000 kroner, and the model becomes a museum piece that just sits unopened on a collector's shelf, which actively harms your word-of-mouth momentum. Nobody's tasting it.
Because they're too afraid to open a 1,000 kroner bottle.
Exactly. They are attempting to scale an artisanal process into a sustainable international enterprise, and the pricing of this first release is going to dictate the global expectation of their brand for the next decade.
So what does this all mean? We are looking at an island nation actively weaponizing its own hostile geography to upend an ancient industry.
It's incredible to watch.
Faer Isles is manipulating the osmotic pressure of gale force winds to accelerate maturation. They're stretching a finite inventory across 3 continents, and they are fighting federal bureaucracies just to validate their local botanicals.
While Einar's is finally capitalizing on a century-old dream after dismantling 130-year-old prohibition laws.
Exactly. They are both master classes in managing, engineering, and ultimately delivering on immense anticipation. I think the safest bet for anyone listening is to acquire 2 bottles of that first release, one to actually drink and analyze the chemical reality, and one to hold as a financial asset.
Hedging your bets is honestly the only logical response to an operation this ambitious. But, the core tension of this entire endeavor leaves a really lingering thought to mull over.
What's that?
Well, we operate in an era dominated by algorithmic prediction, right? Companies spend millions trying to mathematically guarantee a specific consumer outcome.
Sure.
And Faer Isles attempted to do exactly that with their founding manifesto. They were reverse-engineered an entire flavor profile on a whiteboard before they even started.
The grass notes.
Exactly. But to actually create the product, they still had to surrender that meticulously calculated liquid to the wild, unpredictable 6-degree wind whistling through a porous meat shed.
Nature always gets the last word.
It really does. So in any complex undertaking, whether it's building a global brand or crafting a luxury spirit, you really have to ask yourself, how much of our success is derived from the meticulous architecture of our own human expectations? And how much relies entirely on simply leaving room for the unpredictable brilliance of the environment we surrender to?